My brother's mother-in-law was sitting on my bed when I got home, 2 years after I first felt it at the wedding, and she said, "Finally, we're alone tonight. I want you to picture something for a second. You come home from work. Regular Tuesday. Nothing special about it. You are tired. Your back hurts a little. You are thinking about what you have in the fridge. You unlock your front door, you walk down the hallway, you push open the door to your own bedroom, and there is a woman sitting on the edge of your bed, waiting for you, and not just any woman, your brother's mother-in-law. And before you can even process what is happening, before you can find a single word in your entire vocabulary, she looks up at you with the calmest eyes you have ever seen in your life and she says, 'Finally, we are alone tonight.' I froze. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that my whole body just stopped, like someone had unplugged me from the wall. My hand was still on the door frame. My keys were still in my other hand. And I just stood there like an absolute idiot, staring at this woman who I had been trying very, very hard not to think about for almost 2 years, sitting on my bed like she had every right in the world to be there. And here is the thing that is going to take me a minute to explain properly. Because if I just tell you she was sitting on my bed and leave it at that, you are going to think this is one kind of story. And it is not that story. It is something slower than that. Something that started a long time before that Tuesday night. Something that I spent a lot of energy pretending was not happening. Right up until the moment I was standing in a doorway with my keys in my hand and nowhere left to pretend. So let me back up. Because you need to understand where I was before you can understand where this is going. My name is Tavian. I am 38 years old. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house in Raleigh, North Carolina, on a street that gets ridiculous amounts of wind in the fall and practically no shade in the summer, and I have never once gotten around to doing anything about either of those things. I work in supply chain management. I know what that sounds like. It is exactly as quiet as it sounds. I drive to work. Ici der desk. I move numbers from one column to another column and make sure things show up where they are supposed to show up. I go home. I eat something. I watch something. I go to sleep. I do it again. I have been divorced for 6 years. No kids. The marriage ended the way a lot of marriages end. Not with one big explosion, not with some dramatic moment you can point to and say, that is where it broke. It just kind of ran out of whatever it was running on. We were two people who had wanted different things and taken too long to admit it. It was sad in a quiet way. And then it was just over. And I rebuilt my life into something small and manageable and mine. And I told myself that was enough. Most days I believed it. My brother Castle got married 2 summers ago to a woman named Brielle. And I was genuinely happy for them. Castle is 3 years younger than me and he is one of those people who was made for marriage, made for family, made for Sunday dinners and inside jokes and building something with someone. I always knew he would get there. When he called me to tell me Brielle said yes, I sat in my car in a parking lot and I cried a little. Happy tears. Real ones. He deserved everything good that was coming to him. The wedding was in Asheville. Beautiful venue. Old stone building up in the mountains. Everything wrapped in string lights and late summer warmth. I was the best man. I had a speech prepared. I had practiced it in my bathroom mirror more times than I will ever admit to anyone. I was ready. I was composed. I was going to hold it together. And then I met Renata, Brielle's mother. Renata. She came to the rehearsal dinner the night before in a dark green dress and she shook my hand and said, "It is so good to finally put a face to the name." And I said something back. I honestly cannot tell you what I said. Because the moment her hand was in mine, something in my brain just sort of quietly short-circuited and I had to spend the next 30 seconds doing intense internal work to act like a normal human being. She was 44 at the time. She had this kind of stillness about her that I had never encountered in a person before. Not coldness. Not distance. Stillness. Like she was completely at ease inside herself in a way that most people spend their whole lives chasing. She had dark hair she wore pinned up that night, and she laughed at the right things, and she said exactly what she meant without dressing it up or watering it down. And at some point during that rehearsal dinner I realized I had been paying attention to her in a way that was going to be a problem. I filed it away. That is what I did. I looked at it very briefly, recognized it for what it was, and I put it somewhere I did not intend to look again. Because Castle and Brielle were about to get married. Because Renata was the mother of the bride. Because some things are not worth the damage they could cause, and this was one of them, and I was a grown man who was capable of making that decision and sticking to it. And I did stick to it. For almost 2 years I stuck to it. I showed up to every family gathering with my composure completely intact. Thanksgiving at Brielle and Castle's place. Christmas. A birthday dinner in the spring. A backyard cookout last July where Renata wore a yellow dress and told a story about a road trip she had taken by herself through the Smoky Mountains, and the whole table listened like she was reading from a book. I listened too. And I kept my face exactly where it needed to be, and I ate my food, and I went home alone, and I did not think about it. Except that is not entirely true. Because I did think about it. I just only let myself think about it in small doses, in private, in the gaps between other things. And I always put it back where it belonged before it could turn into anything. Until the Tuesday I came home and she was in my room. Okay. So I need to explain the key situation before you start thinking something it is not. Castle had given Renata a key to my house maybe 7 or 8 months before all of this. I cannot even remember exactly why. Something about her dropping off a dish Brielle had left at my place after a family dinner. Something practical that made total sense at the time. She had used it once before, months ago, in the middle of the afternoon when I was at work. Dropped something off and left. I came home to a container of food on my kitchen counter and a text from her saying it was in the fridge, which it was not, it was on the counter, but the gesture was the point. I had not thought much about the key after that. It was just a key. Practical thing. Not a symbol of anything. Except on that Tuesday evening it became the most loaded object in my entire house. I had had a completely unremarkable day. Genuinely nothing. Meetings. Spreadsheets. A conference call that ran 12 minutes over and solved nothing. I had driven home with the radio on and my mind on whether I had enough eggs for what I was thinking about making for dinner. I had unlocked my front door. I had dropped my bag in the entryway. I had walked down the hall. I had pushed open my bedroom door. And there was Renata, sitting on the edge of my bed, hands in her lap, completely composed, the way she always was, except that there was something underneath the composure tonight that was different. Something that had made a decision and was not going back from it. She looked up at me and she said it. Finally, we are alone tonight. And I stood there, keys in my hand, heart doing something irregular. And the only thing I could get out of my mouth was, "Did Castle let you in?" Which in retrospect was probably the least useful thing I could have said in that moment. But it was all I had. She looked at me with an expression that was almost a smile but was holding itself back. "No," she said. "I used the key." "I know," I said. "That is not what I meant." "What did you mean?" she asked. I did not have an answer for that. I just walked in and sat down in the chair in the corner of the room, across from the bed, and we looked at each other. And the house felt completely different with her inside it. Like the walls had moved. Like the ceiling was lower. Like the room I had been living in for 4 years had suddenly become a room I was experiencing for the first time. I looked at her and I said, "Renata, you talked to Castle." She nodded. "I talked to Brielle first," she said. "Then Castle." I leaned forward in the chair. I put my elbows on my knees. And they were okay with this. She held my eyes. "Brielle told me to stop waiting," she said. Those were her exact words. "Stop waiting, Mom. Just go talk to him." I sat with that for a moment. My brother's wife had told her mother to come find me. Castle knew. They had both given this their blessing before Renata had ever walked through my front door. I did not know whether that made me feel better or whether it made the whole thing even more enormous. Maybe both. Probably both. I looked at her and I said, "How long have you been sitting here?" She glanced at the glass of water on my nightstand. She had helped herself to my kitchen. The glass was more than halfway empty. "A while," she said simply. "A while." She had been sitting in my room, alone, waiting for me to come home, for long enough to drink most of a glass of water and decide she was not leaving until we talked. And the thing that hit me hardest in that moment was not the situation itself. It was the courage it took. To do that. To drive to someone's house. To let yourself in. To sit there in the quiet and wait, not knowing exactly how it was going to go, just knowing you were done not saying the thing. I had spent 2 years filing something away. She had spent however long it took her making up her mind to stop. I looked at her and I said, "We should talk." She said, "That is why I am here." And somewhere outside my window, the October wind picked up in that way it does on my street, and the oak leaves came down in a rush, and the ordinary Tuesday evening I had driven home expecting dissolved into something I was not going to be able to file away. Not this time. I got up and went to the kitchen. I did not ask if she wanted coffee. I just started making it because my hands needed something to do and I did not trust the rest of me to hold still if I did not give them a task. I heard her get up from the bed. I heard her footsteps in the hallway. And then she was in the kitchen doorway and she leaned against the frame and she watched me fumble with the coffee maker like I had never used it before in my life, which I had every single morning for 4 years, but apparently I had forgotten how it worked. "Sit down," she said. "Let me do it." I looked at her. "It is my kitchen." She raised one eyebrow just slightly. "Tavian, sit down." I sat down. She made the coffee like she had been in my kitchen 100 times before. Opened the right cabinet on the first try, which she should not have been able to do because I had never shown her where anything was. I watched her find the mugs without looking for them and I thought, how long has she been paying attention to the small details of my life? How long has she been storing things? Because that is what you do when someone matters to you in a way you are not ready to say out loud. You collect details. You remember things they mentioned once. You file them somewhere you actually intend to look at. She brought 2 mugs to the table and sat down across from me. We were quiet for a moment. The coffee was hot. The kitchen light was on. Outside it had gotten dark enough that the window was more mirror than glass, and I could see both of us reflected back. Sitting across from each other at my kitchen table like this was a thing that happened. "Okay," I said. "Tell me how long." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "Honestly," she said, "I noticed you at the rehearsal dinner. The night before the wedding." I said, "I noticed you too." She looked at me. "I know," she said. "That is part of what took me so long to do this. Because I was not sure if what I was seeing was real or if I was just—" She stopped. "Just wanting it to be real," I said. She nodded. "Yeah." I thought about the rehearsal dinner. The dark green dress. Her hand in mine for exactly 3 seconds. The way she had laughed at something someone said and I had looked away immediately like I had been caught doing something. Had she seen that? Had she been doing the same math I was doing from the other side of the table? "I have a question," I said. She looked at me. "That restaurant on Glenwood," I said. "The Italian place. Do you know it?" She was quiet for just a half-second longer than a person who did not know it would have been. "Brielle mentioned you had talked about it once," she said carefully. "At a family dinner. I drove past it a few times. I just sat there." "You drove past it," I said. She met my eyes. "A few times," she said. "Yes." I had driven past that same restaurant twice. Slowed down both times. Sat in my car in traffic thinking about sending a text I never sent. And she had been doing her own version of the same exact thing, from her side of whatever this was, circling the same point neither of us had been willing to land on. "We are both a little ridiculous," I said. She smiled. "Just a little," she said. The real kind of smile. The one she did not dial back in time. And it hit me the same way it had at the rehearsal dinner, the same way it had at every family dinner since, like something warm landing somewhere it had been cold for a while. "I have been divorced for 6 years," I said. "I know," she said. "I have been on my own for 10, she said back. 10 years is a long time, I said. She looked down at her coffee. "It is," she said. "And I got good at it. I genuinely got good at being alone. But there is a difference between being good at something and wanting to keep doing it forever. That is not the same thing. And lately those 2 things have been pulling in different directions for me and I could not figure out why." She looked up. And then I figured out why. I did not say anything. I just let her words settle in the room between us. She told me about her marriage. Not with anger. Not with sadness exactly. More like she was describing whether that had passed. Something she had lived through and come out the other side of and no longer needed to carry everywhere she went. They had wanted different things, she and Brielle's father. They had tried to want the same things for too long before admitting they did not. The divorce had been hard. The years after had been harder in some ways and easier in others. And then she had built something solid in hers and she had stopped waiting for it to look like something other than what it was. "I know what that sounds like," I said. She looked at me. It sounds like your story too, she said. More or less. More or less, I agreed. I told her about my marriage. About how it ended not with a fight but with a slow recognition that we were two people who had stopped going in the same direction a long time before either of us said it out loud. I told her about the years after. About building the small, manageable life. About the house on the windy street. About the kitchen I kept meaning to repaint and never did. About the way ordinary Tuesdays had started feeling longer in the last year or so in a way I could not explain and had not told anyone. She listened the way she always listened. Like you were the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. I had noticed that about her from the very beginning, and I had filed that away too, and I was running out of places to put all the things I had been filing. I have to ask you something, I said. She said, okay. And I want you to be honest. She said, I am always honest. I said, I know. That is why I am asking you. I looked at her. What do you actually want to happen here, Renata? What is the thing you came here tonight to get to? She did not look away. She did not take a breath first. She said, I want to stop pretending that 2 years of family dinners where I sat across a table from you was enough. And I want to find out what happens when we stop pretending together. The kitchen was very quiet. My coffee had gone lukewarm while we were talking. The clock on the microwave said 9:47, and I had no idea where the last 2 hours had gone. I looked at her and I thought about Castle. About Brielle. About all the reasons I had spent 2 years keeping something in a place I did not look at. And I realized something sitting at that table in the quiet of my own kitchen. Looking at this woman who had driven herself to my house and let herself in and sat in my room and waited and made me coffee in my own kitchen and said the truest possible version of what she meant. Some things do not go away just because you are careful with them. They just wait. I need to tell you something, I said. She waited. 8 months ago, I said. Castle and Brielle's anniversary dinner. You were sitting 2 seats down from me and I said something that made everyone laugh. She nodded slowly. I remember, she said. What you don't know, I said, is that I looked at you for about a second too long after that and then spent the drive home having a very long argument with myself about it. She was quiet. Did you win the argument? She asked. I did not answer right away. I said, I showed up to the next family dinner and acted like nothing had happened. So, you tell me. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something quietly, almost to herself. I knew it, she said. I saw that. At the anniversary dinner. I saw the second too long and I told myself I was imagining it because that was safer than believing it was real. That landed in my chest somewhere specific. We had both been sitting 2 seats apart at a dinner table, both seeing the same thing, both deciding it was safer to imagine we were imagining it. Both going home and building arguments and filing things and driving past restaurants and slowing down without stopping. 2 years of that. I looked at her across the kitchen table and I said, what if we stopped imagining it? She held my gaze. I think, she said slowly, that is exactly why I am sitting in your kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. And that was the moment the whole careful structure I had built around this thing started to come apart at the edges. Not in a messy way. In the way that something comes apart when it has been held together long enough and the reason for holding it is finally gone. There was still a lot we had not said. There were still things that needed to be figured out carefully, thoughtfully, in a way that did not hurt anyone who deserved not to be hurt. I knew that. She knew that. Neither of us was pretending otherwise. But something had shifted between the doorway and the kitchen table, and we both knew it, and neither of us was filing it away anymore. We stayed at that table until the clock on the microwave said 11:20. Then she stood up and I walked her to the door and we stood in the entryway for a moment in the way that you stand when you are not quite ready to end something but you also know it is not over. She held up the key. I am going to give this back to you, she said. I looked at it. You can keep it, I said. She closed my hand around it. Ask me properly, she said. Next time. And then she was out the door and walking to her car in the cool October dark, and I was standing on my front step watching her go. And the whole evening felt like something I was going to need a long time to fully understand. I went inside. I stood in the hallway. The empty glass from my nightstand was still on the kitchen counter where she had left it. Her mug was next to mine in the drying rack. 2 mugs. Side by side. Like they had always been there. My phone buzzed. A message from her. It said, I looked up that restaurant on Glenwood. They have availability Friday evening. I stood in my hallway for a long time after that. I read it probably 4 times. Then I sat down on the couch, which I did not plan to do, and I just kind of stayed there in the quiet of my house, trying to catch up to what had just happened. I had spent 6 years divorced. I had spent 2 years managing something that I told myself was manageable. I had spent 8 months losing the argument with myself a little more every time I showed up to a family dinner and came home alone afterward. I had driven past a restaurant twice without stopping. And Renata had walked through my front door on a Tuesday night and sat in my room and waited and made coffee and said exactly what she meant and then handed me a key I had told her to keep. I texted back. 7 o'clock, I said. I will make the reservation tomorrow. 3 dots appeared. Then her message came through. 2 years and you finally stopped driving past things, it said. I set my phone face down on the cushion beside me. And I sat there in my quiet house in Raleigh on a Tuesday night in October. And I let myself actually feel what I had been not feeling for 2 years. Not performing composure. Not filing anything. Just feeling it. Sitting in it. Letting it be real. There was still a lot ahead. I knew that. A first date is a beginning, not a conclusion. There were conversations to be had, things to figure out, a family dynamic that was going to need to be navigated with care and honesty and a lot of good communication. None of that was small. None of it was going to sort itself out overnight. But for the first time in a long time, I was not dreading what was ahead. I was curious about it. Genuinely curious. The kind of curious that sits in your chest like something warm and says, keep going. Find out what comes next. Friday was 3 days away. I made the reservation the next morning before I even got to work. And if you are still here, if you made it through the first part of this with me, then you deserve to know what happened next. Because I lived it. All of it. The Friday that changed everything. The months that followed. The morning I stood in front of a mirror in my own house and realized I was about to marry my brother's mother-in-law, and every single person in our family was smiling when they said our names. So let me tell you the rest. Not the version where I tease you and leave you hanging. The real version. The happy one. Friday came in slow motion and all at once, the way important days always do. I left work early. I went home and changed 3 times, which is ridiculous for a man my age, but I could not get the collar right and I kept thinking about the rehearsal dinner and the dark green dress and how I had failed to act like a normal human being for 30 seconds and I was not going to fail tonight if I could help it. I drove to Glenwood with the windows down even though it was cold. The Italian place on Glenwood Avenue, the one we had both driven past without stopping, the one that had been sitting between us like a promise neither of us had been brave enough to keep. She was already there when I walked in. Not inside at the table. Outside on the sidewalk, leaning against the brick wall like she had all the time in the world, wearing a deep burgundy coat I had never seen before and her hair down for the first time at anything that felt like ours. She looked up when she saw me and she did not dial anything back. She just smiled. The real one. The one from my kitchen on Tuesday night. You made it, she said. I said, I almost turned around twice in the parking lot. She said, I know. I saw you sit there for a minute. I laughed. Of course you did. We went inside. Candlelight. Quiet corner table. No family dinner. No Castle and Brielle 3 seats down acting as a buffer between us and the truth. Just Renata across from me with a glass of red wine and the kind of attention that makes you feel like the only person in the building. We talked for 3 hours. We talked about nothing important and everything important. She told me about teaching herself to cook properly after her divorce because she got tired of eating cereal for dinner and pretending that counted as a meal. I told her about the supply chain job and how sometimes I fix problems nobody will ever notice and how that used to feel like enough and lately it had started feeling like a life that was missing a person in it. At some point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and she said, I am glad you stopped driving past things. I said, I am glad you used the key. She squeezed my fingers once and let go and I felt that squeeze in my chest for the rest of the night. We walked afterward. Down Glenwood. Past shop windows reflecting us back. 2 people who were not hiding anymore. She slipped her arm through mine at the corner and we did not talk for a block and it was the most romantic silence I have ever been inside. When we got to where her car was parked she turned to me and she said, I want to see you again. Not in 3 days. Tomorrow. I said, tomorrow works. She said, Castle already knows I am seeing you tomorrow. He texted me this afternoon. He said, Mom, just be happy. That is all I want. I stood there on a Friday night in Raleigh with the October air sharp and clean, and I felt something unlock in me that had been locked for a very long time. The first real conversation with Castle happened on Sunday. He called me. Not a text. A call. I was in my kitchen making coffee, still riding the high of Friday and Saturday, and I saw his name on the screen and my stomach dropped because some part of me was still braced for the conversation where my little brother tells me I have crossed a line we cannot uncross. I answered. He said, Tav, can you come over? Brielle is making pancakes and she says you are not allowed to be weird about this. I said, I do not know how not to be weird. He said, then just come over and be weird here. We need to talk like adults, not like two guys who are going to let this turn into something it is not. So I went. Brielle opened the door before I could knock. She hugged me hard, the kind of hug that means something, and she whispered in my ear, I am so glad you finally stopped being stupid. Then she let go and grinned at me like she had personally solved a problem the rest of us had been too slow to fix. Castle was at the stove. Renata was at the table with coffee. The four of us in one kitchen. Family but different now. Not wrong different. Just honest different. Castle slid a plate in front of me and he sat down across from me and he looked me in the eye the way he used to when we were kids and one of us had done something that needed saying out loud. He said, I need you to hear this from me, not from rumors or sideways comments at Thanksgiving. Brielle and I talked about this before Renata ever used that key. We talked about it for months, actually. Brielle watched her mom come home from every family dinner a little quieter. She watched her light up when you walked in the room and go dim when you left. She told me, your brother is in love with my mother and she is in love with him and they are both too scared to break our family to admit it. And I said, then we do not let them break the family. We help them not be scared. Brielle pointed her fork at me. She said, I told my mom to stop waiting. Those were my exact words. Stop waiting, Mom. Just go talk to him. I meant it. I have never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you. Not even when I was a kid and I did not understand what I was seeing. She deserves to be happy. You deserve to be happy. Castle deserves not to have two people he loves acting miserable at every cookout for the next 20 years. Renata was quiet. She was looking at her coffee. Castle reached over and put his hand on her shoulder and he said, Mom, I am happy for you. I mean it. You have been on your own a long time. You built a good life. But good is not the same as full. And when I look at you with Tav, you look full. I could not speak for a second. Then I said, I do not want to make anything strange for you. For any of you. Castle said, the only thing that would make it strange is if you two keep pretending at every holiday that there is nothing there when everyone in the room can feel it. Brielle and I would rather have a brother and a mother-in-law who are honest than two people who are polite and lonely. Brielle said, Amen. We ate pancakes. Renata reached under the table and found my hand and held it there while Castle told a story about burning the first batch and nobody let go of the moment like it was fragile. Because it was not fragile anymore. It was real. That was the beginning of us, out in the open. Not easy at first. I will not pretend it was. There were conversations with extended family that required patience. There were looks at the grocery store when someone who knew Brielle saw Renata holding my hand. There were nights when Renata called me at 11 and said, Are we doing the right thing? And I drove to her place and sat on her couch until 2 in the morning reminding each other that love is not the same as convenience and we were not convenient. We were true. But every hard moment was worth the ordinary ones that followed. Renata started leaving a toothbrush at my house. Then a drawer. Then she was there on Sunday mornings making coffee in my kitchen like she had always belonged there. Finding the mugs without looking. Humming something I could never quite name. I repainted the kitchen wall she had teased me about never finishing. She picked the color. A soft warm white that made the whole room feel like morning. Castle and Brielle had us over every other week. Sometimes it was cookouts in the backyard. Sometimes it was just takeout and a board game and Renata laughing so hard she had to set her wine down. Brielle would catch my eye across the table and smile like she had personally arranged the universe and was pleased with the result. Castle would clap me on the shoulder on the way out and say, You good? And I would say, Yeah, I am good. And I meant it every time. 6 months in, Renata stayed. Not a visit. Not a trial. She brought her plants. She brought her books. She brought the yellow dress from the cookout last July folded carefully in a garment bag like it was something sacred. And she hung it in the closet we now shared, and she stood in the bedroom doorway watching me carry her boxes in, and she said, "I have not lived with someone in 10 years. I am going to be terrible at it for at least a week." I said, "I have lived alone for 6. We can be terrible together." She laughed. She kissed me. And that night we ordered Thai food and sat on the floor because we had not unpacked the dining table yet, and we talked about what we wanted this house to become. Not my house. Not her apartment left behind. Ours. Those 6 months were the romance I did not know I was still capable of. Slow mornings. Her hand finding mine under the sheets. Road trips to the Smokies because she had told that story at the cookout and I wanted to see the mountains with her instead of imagining them from a table. Rain on the windshield and her head on my shoulder and no filing anything away. Just us. She met my friends. I met hers. We fought once about something stupid, dishes in the sink, and we fixed it before bed because we were both too old and too tired of walking away from things that mattered. She cried at a movie I thought was fine, and I held her and understood that loving someone is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is passing the tissues and not making a joke about it. And sometimes it is bigger. One night in April, 6 months almost to the day after she moved in, we were on the back porch. The wind on my street doing its fall thing even though it was spring. Rattling the oak branches like it had the night she sat on my bed and said, "Finally we are alone tonight." She was in one of my sweaters. I was in the chair I had sat in that first Tuesday when I did not know what to say. She said, "Tavian, I want to marry you." I had not planned a speech. I had thought about rings. I had thought about timing. I had not thought she would beat me to the sentence. I said, "I want that too." She said, "I want a small wedding. I want Castle to walk me down the aisle because he has been more of a son to me in the last year than I expected anyone to be. I want Brielle to cry in the front row because she will and she will not care who sees. I want your house. Our house. I want ordinary Tuesdays that do not feel long anymore." I said, "Yes. All of it. Yes." We told Castle and Brielle the next day. Brielle screamed. Actually screamed. Happy. Hands over her mouth. Then she grabbed Renata and rocked her back and forth like they were 17 again. Castle pulled me into the garage where the grill was, and he looked at me with wet eyes and he said, "I am happy, Tav. I am really happy. You know that, right?" I said, "I know." He said, "Brielle has been waiting for this since the wedding. She told me once she could not stand watching her mom leave family dinners alone. She said, 'Your brother is a good man and my mom is a good woman and I do not care what anyone thinks about the labels.' She wanted her mom happy. I wanted you happy. We both got what we wanted. I had to look away for a second so he would not see me fall apart. We got married in August. Small ceremony. Asheville again because that was where Castle and Brielle had started and it felt right to add our chapter in the same mountains. Not the big stone venue from their wedding. A smaller garden behind an inn, string lights and late summer warmth. The same kind of air that had made everything feel possible 2 years earlier when I met Renata in a dark green dress and tried very hard not to fall in love. This time I did not try. Castle walked Renata down the aisle. He kissed her cheek before he handed her to me, and he whispered something I could not hear, and she nodded and smiled, and I saw my brother happy in a way that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with love. Brielle sat in the front row in a pale blue dress with tears running down her face, and she was grinning through all of them. She mouthed thank you at me during the vows, and I knew what she meant. Thank you for loving her. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for giving my mom the life she stopped believing she would get. Renata said her vows without dressing them up or watering them down. She always said exactly what she meant. She said, "I drove past a restaurant for months because I was afraid. You sat in a doorway with your keys in your hand because you were afraid. We are not afraid anymore. I choose you. On the windy street and the ordinary Tuesdays, and every morning you make coffee badly until I take over." I said mine. I told her about the rehearsal dinner and the 2 years of family dinners and the Tuesday she sat on my bed and the mugs side by side in the drying rack. I told her she was the warm thing in my chest that said keep going. I told her I would choose her every day for the rest of my life. When they pronounced us married, Castle cheered loud enough that the birds left a tree. Brielle threw petals that stuck in Renata's hair, and she laughed and did not fix it. Renata kissed me in front of everyone we loved, and I did not file a single feeling away. The reception was small. Good food. Good wine. Castle gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then got quiet at the end when he said, "My brother waited his whole life to be careful, and then he met someone worth being brave for. I am proud of you both." Brielle stood up after and she said, "Mom, I told you to stop waiting. I am so glad you listened." Renata held my hand under the table. I looked at my brother across the room, arm around his wife, face open and happy. I looked at Brielle, who had wanted her mother happy more than she had wanted anything to stay simple. I looked at my wife, my brother's mother-in-law, the woman who had sat in my room on an ordinary Tuesday and changed every ordinary day that came after. We drove home to Raleigh that night. Our house, the kitchen painted the color she chose. 2 mugs in the drying rack that were not going anywhere. The key still on my ring, the one she had closed my hand around and said, "Ask me properly next time." I had asked. She had said yes. We had built the rest together. That was a year ago now. Castle calls every Sunday. Brielle sends photos of their garden and sometimes photos of us from the wedding with heart emojis that would embarrass me if they did not make me smile. Renata and I had Thanksgiving at our place this year. She cooked. I set the table. Castle brought wine. Brielle brought pie and a hug for her mom that lasted a long time. After everyone left, Renata and I stood in the kitchen washing dishes side by side the way we always do. She bumped her hip against mine and she said, "Are you happy?" I thought about the man I was before all of this. Divorced. Alone. Managing a life that was small and safe and missing the one thing that would have made it feel like living. I thought about my brother, who wanted me happy more than he wanted anything to stay conventional. I thought about Brielle, who told her mother to stop waiting because she could see what love looked like even when we were too scared to name it. I said, "I am happy. I am really happy." She dried her hands and she turned to me and she said, "Me too." Finally. Outside, the wind came down the street the way it always does in the fall. Inside, the house was warm. My wife was smiling at me in the kitchen we shared. My brother was home with his wife. Both of them at peace with a family that turned out wider and stranger and more beautiful than any of us had planned. That is the whole story. Not the part where I ask you to wait. The part where it ends the way it was always supposed to end. With honesty. With courage. With all of us happy. And if you are still listening, from wherever you are in the world, I hope you get your happy ending too. I hope you stop driving past the things that matter. I hope someone hands you a key and says, "Ask me properly," and you do. Because I did. And it was worth every single ordinary Tuesday it took to get there.
Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you have a real story that stayed with you, share it below in the comments. I will turn it into a next video.